time to get your car talk on with the Car and Truck Talk live stream. Gentlemen, start your engines.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to this very happy and special fall edition of Car and Truck Talk. I'm Rich.
And I'm Rick.
And we're talking cars, trucks, SUVs with you, a little bit of everything as usual. And Rick, we last spoke probably around the start of summer, and we seem to do at least a podcast a season here. And we're almost into the fall season here, and great time for the car shows around. I think, well, I'm located in southern New Jersey, so I think this weekend down in Wildwood, New Jersey, there's at least 2 car shows planned over the weekend, and that'll be towards the end of September here. So it's a great time to go out and experience old cars.
Yeah, it's kind of winding down the season, the racing season, the car show season. It's still happening, but it's slowly starting to wind down now. Pretty much within the next few weeks, it's pretty much all done, and all the cars will be put away for the winter time. And anybody with their project cars or race cars or show cars will be put away for winter in their garages. And it's time to get your everyday cars pretty much ready for winter, you know, fluid checks and oil changes and tires, which are a big deal, especially in the areas that get a lot of snow.
Yes, indeed. We'll be getting that weather coming in. And getting back to the car shows, I'm wondering for big car aficionados out there, what's your favorite part about a car show? Is it the older cars, some of the specialized cars, the hot rods? We've talked about some of the rat rods on the show in previous editions if you listen to our old shows. But love to hear your comments on it. So if you're listening to the podcast live, type it into the screen there on YouTube, and we'd love to hear why you go to car shows.
Yeah, I mean, my personal favorite, going back probably about 25 years ago or so, is a thing called Pro Street, which some people still might use that terminology. It's pretty much where they would tub the inner wheel wells of the rear, so the tires can be real big, and then they would put a fuel cell in the trunk, and it's pretty much like a drag car that's street legal, so to speak. And you would know, you see a Pro Street car because the tires are huge if you look underneath, and the wheel wells go well inside to the trunk. Mm-hmm. Usually you'd have a Ford 9-inch rear, and you would just see the tires and then the pumpkin on the rear, and that's it. And that's such a really nice look. That's my favorite to see at a car show, which, you know, it's getting to be more rare now. People are just kind of restoring muscle cars, which are still my favorites. The muscle cars are my favorites of all of them.
Very cool. Yeah, there's, you know, a whole lot of vendors that generally gravitate to the larger car shows. Tonight I'm wearing you probably can't see it because I'm not on the webcam tonight, but I picked up a nice BMW hat from a local dealer the other day. I got a couple buddies that work there, and you know, I stopped in, checked out their merchandise and all, and picked up a hat. So that's one thing that I've noticed about car aficionados, Rick, is they love to associate themselves with cars and stuff like that. They love to wear the brand names of your favorite cars and things. So that's part of the whole process.
Absolutely. T-shirts, jackets. It's a whole lifestyle. And like you said, it's usually a particular brand that most people would kind of support and wear all the apparel. Another big thing now with the youth now is the sport compacts or imports, or whatever you want to call them. And drifting is a big thing. And a lot of the, you know, your sport compact cars, your Hondas, they're big time now, and they have another whole following in their their own world, I should say. And a lot of those younger guys and gals now are really getting into this like drifting, and the Honda shows are just just enormous, and they're actually taking over the car show industry. You and I are, 40s, 50s. We're kind of with the older stuff, but the new generation of what the future is going to be with these car shows are all these sport compacts and the lowered stances, these 4 cylinders that are really built, things like that.
Yeah, it's amazing how different brands, like Nissan, for example, has what they call Nismo products. And for somebody that's into cars and racing and stuff like that, they make a nice little offering there with the Nismo package. They have different color rims and turbos in some of the smaller cars. There's a Sentra that has like a 2.0 turbo and 6-speed manual trans. And today's youth don't really get into those manual trans cars enough like they should, but cars like that kind of give you a good feeling about the industry, where it's going.
Absolutely, and there are, it's mixed. You have some of these youth, I should say, they're learning. There are some of them are learning how to drive a manual, and like you said, it's not like it was years ago. I just don't grasp the concept of building a 4-door car, but it's where it is today. I am not interested in it personally, and I'm yet to race and lose to a Honda, so to speak. And you can see my interests don't lie in that genre, but it is what it is, and it's here to stay, unfortunately, for the people like us that are a little bit old school. But I understand the technology, and I do understand how they're built. I guess you could say it's somewhat impressive for a 4-cylinder, but what a lot of these youth don't understand is their cars weigh next to nothing compared to a muscle car. So if they beat a muscle car, it's almost like a motorcycle racing a car. The power to weight ratio is so different. You're not comparing apples to apples at all.
Right. Years past, the big players in high performance used to be Ford, Chevy, and Dodge, but as Rick was talking about, now it's your Hondas, Acuras, to a certain extent other brands. Toyota's got a couple nice products out there, and as you said, Rick, people are into drifting, and what we try to do on the show a lot is talk safety, and we encourage anybody that's into cars and to do things safely. That sometimes there's racing that goes on with cars, and you don't want to really do that, and you don't want to be a spectator to a lot of those things that are illegal. Car races, that sort of thing. We've seen some terrible accidents in the past of things that go wrong, and things do go wrong very fast in that sort of a setup where there's it's unofficial, it's not sanctioned, and maybe you're down in a big city somewhere, and people are going to race down an abandoned strip or something. Like, do yourself a favor and just go the other way.
Well, the whole point of your local racetrack is to give you a safe place to race. Every drag strip has what they call a street night, where you take whatever it is that you drive every day and you bring it to the track. That way it's a safe space where you don't have to worry about getting pulled over by police. You don't have to worry about killing anyone. And it's meant for that reason. And a lot of people do take advantage of it, but unfortunately TV shows like Street Outlaws kind of ruin it, really. I mean, they have their disclaimer at the beginning of the show, but hey, that's what they do. That's what they do. There's no reason why they can't do those races on what they call a no prep street night at their local track and still wager, and you could do the same exact thing at your local track. I was young and dumb at one point in time where I had a Mustang back in the day, and I raced on the street. The second I raced on the track, I realized how dumb it was to race on the street. And then all my racing was done on the track. And now, being a speed demon that I was back then, I'm like a super slow now on the street. People pass me up because I drive too slow, but I'll still go to the track and tear it up where it belongs. And that's the same thing with off-road. These people with their trucks, they lift them and they drive them on the street all the time. Again, it's a nice look, But if you're not going to take it off-road, building something for just looks is really not necessary for everyday driving, nor is it practical.
Correct. And like we were saying, certain programs on television glamorize different activities that should not take place. You know, you have local tracks available, and I've just seen it so often where there's tragedies that can be avoided when things go wrong like that. Just not a good thing. So we always preach safety here on the Car and Truck Talk program. And we're going to be talking a little car repairs a little later in the program here for our fall edition. And as Rick was saying, it's kind of time to get your car ready for winter. You know, it's probably about 8 or 12 weeks away before we're going to have some snow and maybe some ice. But Rick, what do you think is your top tip for fall maintenance as far as you know, what you could do right away to get yourself ready for winter?
Well, nowadays with the way the cars are built, a lot of your maintenance is really far away from what it was years ago. Every 20,000 miles you were doing tune-ups. Now that's not really heard of anymore. We used to do coolant flushes years ago all the time. Within 2 years, now it's 5-year coolant. Most of the time, your coolants now are long extended life. So that kind of changes the priorities as to what you need to do first. My opinion, the very first thing for winter that you would want to make sure is good is your tires. That is probably, at this point in time with today's vehicles, is the top priority. You want to make sure you have a good tire tread. Make sure your tires are not balding, they're not wearing unevenly, because your tires are really everything. A great set of tires in the winter months is priceless. I mean, it's also a lifesaver. You got to make sure you have a great set of tires, and all-weather tires are good for your average vehicle. You want to get something a little more aggressive, you can go with a snow tire, and that doesn't necessarily mean a studded tire. Those are kind of a thing of the past. It wouldn't be a bad idea to get an all-weather tire and even get a set of chains, which, again, is almost a thing of the past, but still available, still legal to use in most places. You need to check with your local authorities, though, to make sure. But that's what you really should be prepared for. Always have a flashlight. Again, speaking of just the vehicle, tires is definitely the most essential thing, in my opinion, at this point, the way cars are today.
And something I just learned recently is if you have an SUV or an all-wheel drive tire on your or all-wheel drive car rather, or SUV or truck, that you can't replace individual tires like you think you would with just the, say you can't afford it, but you can't just go out and buy a cheap tire and throw it on due to the fact that the thread depth may be different. So if you have a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive out there, keep that in mind. If you're going to replace your tires, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, you have to replace them generally with 4 tires.
All-wheel drive, it's more so because that's all the time. On a four-wheel drive where it's selective, you definitely got to do at least 2 at a time, front or back. It's a little bit less important on a four-wheel drive versus an all-wheel drive, because all-wheel drive is all the time. Four-wheel drive, again, is selective. And that's another thing I want to discuss. A lot of people feel that, four-wheel drives are superior in snow and all-wheel drive is superior in snow. And for traction purposes, they are. However, if you don't have good tires, four-wheel drive is not as good as it's going to be. All-wheel drive is not as good as it's going to be. And also, braking doesn't change whether you have an all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive or two-wheel drive. And it's almost guaranteed that a front-wheel drive vehicle with a great set of tires will outperform a four-wheel drive vehicle with just worn tires or average tires in heavy snow. And it's just, nowadays most cars aren't rear-wheel drive anymore. Mm-hmm. So that whole notion where you have to have a four-wheel drive for snow is really only a sales gimmick at this point. The only time you need four-wheel drive is if you live in a mountainous area where you have high inclines, where you need that extra traction. For the average person in most of the states, a front-wheel drive vehicle with good tires is going to really provide you with more than enough traction for winter months. It's just an expense that you don't need to have a four-wheel drive. Like I said, unless you're in a mountainous area or if you live in a very hilly area, it's all marketing ploys by these car companies. They want you to spend the extra money and have all these extra things. It provides a lot of extra problems on the car, or SUV and truck rather. All-wheel drive is another thing. They're great. Bad weather, they are great. However, is it really necessary? And honestly, the answer is no. If you don't live in an area, especially in New Jersey, you do not need all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, because you literally have 3 months out of the year where you don't have snow. And if you have a good front-wheel drive vehicle with a good set of tires, you're going to do just fine in the snow. Now, will that work in Maine? Depends where you live. But for the most of us in the United States, you do not need four-wheel drive.
Well, it's a creature comfort. As you said, you don't need it, but a lot of people feel a little more comfortable with it depending on their road conditions, where they live, But I just got a vehicle that has intelligent all-wheel drive, so it'll switch in and out of all-wheel drive upon demand. So it's a nice sense of safety and things like that. But as Rick said, for the most part, for your standard operation of a vehicle, and you want to keep prices down and your costs down, that you don't really need it. But moving on.
No, I was just going to say exactly. That's exactly it.
Moving on a little bit with the show here, talking about some of the car care tips for fall. Rick was saying some of the obvious ones. And when's the last time you had your oil changed? That's something that a lot of people with cars don't think about. I've heard some horror stories in the business, whereas people just don't change their oil, and it's sort of like a person that doesn't care for themselves with their nutrition, I guess, is the best thing to say. If you're not going to feed yourself well and things like that, your body's going to tell you about it, and that's what cars do. Your engine wears down faster. You could ruin an engine by not changing the oil. So that's one of the obvious ones. But another tip for the fall might be your air filter, of course. I would recommend at least like once a year to change your air filter, and most drivers fall into that category of maybe 10 to 12, maybe even 15,000 mile driving in 1 year. And a lot of people don't realize your air filter gets filthy by that time. And that's another thing that'll prolong the life of your engine just by changing that air filter.
Exactly, Rich. And what you're basically saying is just basic car maintenance, which really people should be doing all year long, and another important fluid, of course, during your winter months is your antifreeze, or slash coolant is what they call it, because it actually cools the engine temperature, but it's also antifreeze because it's fluid that doesn't freeze. That's where you're going to get your heat from. If your antifreeze is topped off properly, you're going to get good heat through your heater core. A lot of times, if antifreeze is low, you might not get really warm heat coming out of there. Only other parts on older cars that you may want to replace is a thermostat. But again, we're talking little older cars. The newer stuff today, it's not as necessary until you actually have a failure with the thermostat. But years ago, in the older cars, you would just replace them every couple of years just to ensure that they work properly. Again, checking the coolant this time of year is very important. You want to make sure that it's not dirty. If so, you want to do a drain fill or even a complete flush. That would always help, keep the engine running properly, as well as giving you that superior heat that you'll need this time of year.
Yeah, and by what Rick means about a flush is your radiator and your cooling system accumulates some junk in it, so to speak, for lack of a better word. And some of the chemicals that they use to flush that radiator and cooling system is going to clean some of that out for you. So if you do go to your service lane at your local dealership and they recommend a coolant flush, that would probably be one of your better things to get now that it's a change of season. You want to go with that probably now in the fall, and there's prior to maybe the summer is probably your best times to do that. And that's going to give you the most bang for your buck as far as keeping your vehicle nice and serviceable, clean. Uh, you could have a bad radiator due to not changing your coolant over a certain amount of time. And of course, another thing is if you go to smaller shops, they may not offer a coolant flush per se. So, seek it out if your local shop doesn't offer it.
Exactly. A lot of places will just do what they call a drain and fill, which isn't too bad. It's better than nothing. What they do is they drain the radiator, just the radiator, and then they'll fill it up with fresh coolant, which is good. The problem with that is when you get a full flush, it gets all of the old coolant out of the engine block, out of the entire coolant system. And when you just get a drain and fill, it's just getting the radiator out. And then what happens is any of the older coolant will end up mixing with the newer coolant. And again, it's still okay. It's better than nothing doing what they call a drain and fill, but you're still going to have some of the older coolant in the engine block, and it will eventually mix in with the new stuff. It's just one of those things you got to kind of weigh out your options. And if, financially, if you could swing a full flush, again, drain and fill is better than leaving the old fluid in there because you're at least getting a good percentage of the fluid out and replacing it with fresh fluid. It's just that there is going to be some of the older fluid in the block that you're not going to get out without a full flush.
Exactly. And I want to recommend going to a dealer for a service like that. If you have a Ford or if you have a Chevy, a Nissan or a Toyota, whatever brand you have of car, you want to go to where the mechanics are specially trained to offer you this service and give you the most for your money. You don't necessarily want to go to a Jiffy Lube or something like that because, some of those younger employees that they hire may have just been fresh out of high school or working at McDonald's a week or two ago. And then you're coming into Jiffy Lube expecting a premium service, which they charge a pretty good price for as well. You can compare prices with some of these quick service companies similar to Jiffy Lube with a dealership. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that a dealership is in business to keep you coming back. So they're going to offer you a decent price on some of these services. You'd be surprised how much money you could save just by looking on like a company website. If you go to a certain dealership, always check their company website. There's always going to be parts and service specials on these websites. And, a lot of people just don't think about that, especially when they have problems with their cars. They need to get it fixed right away. A lot of it isn't preventative maintenance. But if you think ahead, you can save a lot of money that way.
Exactly, Rich. And we're not saying your local neighborhood mechanic or your local neighborhood friend that you've been going to for years is bad. We're not saying that. We're just saying that you want to make sure you go where the technicians are properly trained on your vehicle. And there are some very good neighborhood technicians out there that can do everything we're talking about. Just the only downfall is when you have a private shop, they're not always up on top of the education as well as a dealership technician for the simple reason is they have to pay to train. And it's very difficult for a shop owner to pay for all his employees to be up to date on the newest training. In a dealership, it's mandated, and all the technicians have to take their classes to be up to date on all the newest technology, all the newest tools, all the newest engine designs, and they're going to do it for free because they're already employed by them, and they're the ones coming out with it. So you got to keep that in mind. Your old time shop from years ago, they're still good, but they're not always going to be on top of the newest technology, newest designs. They may not even have the newest tools, because some of the dealerships today only get the tools that are for their specific vehicle, and it takes a while for Snap-on or Matco or Mac to duplicate that tool to be sold to the aftermarket, and the aftermarket meaning not the dealer.
Right. Service tools are not sold to the general public by dealerships. A lot of times people will call and ask, can they buy certain tools to fix vehicles, especially, as Rick was saying, a lot of the work is done now through computers. If you need an upgrade to your software for your car, things like that, you're not going to get that at a local shop. You're going to have to go back to the dealer, because for several reasons, the local shop cannot afford, in most instances, to have all the different brands at their disposal to properly service, especially the newer cars, the 17s, the 16s. As we start getting into the future here, a lot of these cars are becoming more high tech, and in order to fix them, you need the high tech tools. So I know in certain dealerships, they don't upgrade their equipment as much as they should. If you go into the dealership and you see old computers, for example, sitting around on desks, then you know you're probably not in the right dealership for them to fix your vehicle, because that will tell you several things about a dealership. That, you know, that their dedication to technology, so to speak, and their willingness to spend on technology may not be there. So look around your surroundings as well, as one of my tips. Whenever you get your car serviced and wherever you go, if you walk into a place and you got a bad feeling, you know, grab a brochure and do it 180 and go right out the door, or 360. But you know, if you see a bunch of kids standing around joking around, you know, do you want somebody like that working on your car? Maybe not.
Exactly. It almost reminds me of that commercial where there's three guys sitting on the car eating sandwiches, and like, I got three of my best guys on it right now. Exactly. And that seriously happens. But like in any shop, cleanliness is a big deal. If just something as simple as that says a lot about a shop. If they're really clean, you know, they're putting the time and effort to making sure that it's appealing to the consumer. And if they're doing that, you know they're going to hire a very good quality team.
Right.
You go to a shop, it's dirty. There's tools all over.
Trash filled to capacity.
Trash everywhere, and you know they're using jacks outside to repair your car, and you know they're just dirty everywhere from head to toe. They're filled with grease. I'd stay away from that.
And you have to.
It's just really, it's scary if they're filled with grease. You know there's something wrong. You know, occasionally you'll get dirty, but I mean most shops that are clean and technicians are clean, they kind of know what they're doing.
Exactly, and be very afraid of that situation as well, because you know everybody wants to save money, and chances are at a shop that looks like Rick was just describing, a bunch of trash laying around, and even certain dealerships, you know, do your due diligence, so to speak, and do your own research. Go back, take a look in through the window of the shop. But a lot of the times customers are not permitted to go into the shop, but there are areas where you can look into a shop and, you know, look at the floor. Is it filthy? Does it need painting? Is there trash all over the place? Then you know you're probably in the wrong spot. And there's plenty of other dealerships and repair facilities, for that matter, to take your car to.
Exactly. And again, it's same thing with a dealership. There's dealerships that I've worked in, I've dealt with, that were just horrible, and they never reinvested into painting the walls or any of that stuff. And sure enough, they went out of business in time. So you kind of really got to look at your surroundings, and you don't want to sit there and judge something by cosmetics. However, that is a very telltale sign of how they conduct business.
And that's a good point. And another good point is, even with certain shops outside of the dealership world, you know, they may look good from the road, you know, your Firestone, your Goodyear type of places. And you may get a false sense of security that everything is going great inside of those shops as well because of the name. You know, you wouldn't believe that, you know, they would strip a drain plug at Firestone or Goodyear, or just to use an example, they're probably great chains, and I hope someday they would sponsor the show. But um, do your research, because you're the consumer, and you know you can either benefit or uh, be get a bad deal from some of these shops. You don't know how many times I've heard a story about one of these quickie lube type places, and I'll use the Jiffy Lube brand just as an example.
Because most likely we won't be getting sponsored by them. Okay.
I've been dogging them all night on this podcast, but
they are, honestly, they're terrible, and we will bash them because they are terrible.
Yeah, they
stay away from Jiffy Lubes, all of them. Just stay away from
them. And you know, not 100% of them are bad, but we've been in the business in several levels, so we've heard the horror stories. You know, people go to fill your brake reservoirs up, put the wrong fluids in there, then you end up needing calipers, brakes. You need the whole setup of to replace these things for your vehicle when that happens. And you know, that's just a question of, like Rick was saying earlier, no proper training for these younger guys that are 17, 18. They want to pay them $10 an hour to work on your vehicle. And it's not something that's a kid's play type of thing. It's not something that you want to trust somebody that, you know, you could imagine yourself as a 17-year-old. And certain 17-year-olds are more mature than others, but why do you want to take the risk?
Exactly. And if you go to a shop and
and you see like three guys standing around chugging beers.
Well, I was going to get at, and the reason why I'm laughing, because Rich and I both know some shop like this, where if you get a shop and you drive down the road and your tire falls off, that's not a good shop to go to. And like I said, I'm only laughing because we've actually known a shop like that.
Yes, we've.
They have more oil on them that's in the car. I mean, those are the ones you want to stay away from.
Exactly. And we had a nickname for one of the mechanics, and it was Oily, because, yeah, he looked, you know, drenched in oil. So, you know.
And that's what we're referring to. You know, there's some shops out there that they just run outside in the rain and jack your car up and just go right underneath. I mean, if they don't have a proper shop with a lift, you know, keeping things neat and clean, and that's what we're referring to. That's where you want to stay away from.
Yeah, and
we're just trying to set you, our fans here and our listeners here, set you on the right path. You know, we're not going to mislead you. We just know from doing this for so many years.
And basically, what it boils down to is, don't try to save a buck, and always think about your safety, because sometimes when you save money by going to shops like that, it's going to come back to haunt you. As Rick said, he laughed about it, but true story. Not once, but several times, we got a call from a certain shop in the aftermarket world that we had sold parts to for tire studs and nuts and things like that. And we got a call one day in reference to a wheel flying off on a highway. And it's you know, it's bizarre in the sense that when we got the call from the shop, they alleged that all 5 studs on the wheel broke because of a defect, quote unquote. Your parts are defective, and they just happen to be of Spanish persuasion. And they're explaining to us that all 5 grade 8 studs, and if you know anything about automotive terminology, that's one of the hardest steel studs you can buy, grade 8. The likelihood of all 5 of those snapping because they're defective is probably about, I would say, less than a 0.5%.
Yeah, it's really impossible for that to happen. And if you go to these places and they just do changing parts, they're guessing, stay away from them. I mean, just because you're saving money doesn't mean you're getting anything from that. If you're going to have to bring it back 10 times, really, are you saving money? Get it done once, get it done right, pay the dollars. I mean, it's not cheap to become a mechanic or a technician. The investment that we have to make in tools alone, I mean, I've had well over $50,000 invested in tools. That's just hand tools and air tools. That's not even talking specialty things. That's not talking essential shop tools. That's just your Snap-on style box. Now, granted, did I have to get Snap-on? No. But it does make the life easier on a technician when he doesn't have to go after work and pick tools out. When they break, they're recovered 100%. When a truck comes to you, the quality is going to be there. They back up their product. They're going to warranty everything. You break a socket, the guy comes on Thursday, you give him the socket, you got another one in your hand, and you're ready to go. That's the benefit of the trucks. And they warranty everything, and it's all there. They have all the latest and greatest, and it's not cheap. But on the other hand, it's similar, it's similar to a doctor in the sense of, they're a doctor for cars. There's a lot of education involved. Again, if you're in a dealership, they're going to cover that education. But a lot of times to get to that dealership and get that top rank, you have to already have education prior to that. And that costs money. So, there's a lot involved that people don't know. And in all honesty, to be dead honest with everyone listening, if you were thinking about getting in the automotive field, don't. It's not a good business to be into. It really isn't. It's a good knowledge. You can make a good living, but there's just so much BS, to be completely frank with you, that it's just not worth getting into.
There's a lot of gray areas, I think, is what Rick is referring to. I know personally myself, I've heard different stories. Just recently, I heard a wild story about a customer, believe it or not, who accosted a mechanic at a dealership. Apparently, the story went, the mechanic was going to get the keys from one of the service writers, and in the process of doing that, this customer, who happened to be a husband of and his wife, actually just approached this mechanic and just accused him of leering at his wife in a strange way. And I'm not quite sure how the story went, but the gentleman started yelling at the mechanic, and somehow, when the mechanic was bringing in the car, an argument ensued. And believe it or not, the end result of that whole situation, where a customer accosted a technician, was the technician ended up getting fired. So that's what Rick is saying. There's a lot of weird circumstances that go on in automotive that are behind the scenes that nobody knows about. Nobody hears about these strange stories. If you want to call them untold stories of dealerships and repair facilities, that's what they are,
And there's a lot of fraud everywhere, not just in dealers or aftermarket places, and you just really got to be careful. It's, as an employee of places, the dealership, it's all about numbers when you're on the inside. And if you're not turning a number for them, you'd be the greatest person in the world, super nice, they'll let you go. They'll just fire you with no warning, no rhyme or reason. There's no loyalty in the dealership. And even in the shop, if you're not making the shop money, they'll kick you out. And there's a very large turnover. You look at a shop mechanic these days, or a technician, and look at their track record. Guaranteed they've worked elsewhere. I mean, Rich and I both have worked at many different places in the automotive industry. And that's mainly because it's that type of place. You bounce around, get more money somewhere else. They go out of business. You go to another dealership or another aftermarket company. It's just the nature of the business. It's unfortunate.
Yes, it is. Well, we've droned on a little bit about some of the positive and negative aspects about going to certain places to get your car repaired. And Rick, as we wind up this podcast here, our special autumn edition of Car and Truck Talk. We'll lighten the talk up a little bit. Wanted to talk a little bit about accessories for your vehicle. And I sort of gravitate towards the newer cars, but certainly some of the older cars can be accessorized as well. And I'm wondering what some people's favorite accessories are out there once you get, say, you lease a car or you buy yourself a brand new SUV or something. What could be one of your top picks for accessories, Rick?
Well, it depends again what type of vehicle we're talking about. Personally, I drive, trucks and vans and things of that nature. So I'm all about hitches and, trailer brakes, and make sure it has a luggage rack, cargo type things, especially for the hitch, things like that. That's where I'm at, floor mats. I'm not a fan of carpet, but pretty much unless you get a vinyl floor or complete metal, you're going to get carpet. So I like to get the nice big thick rubber all-weather floor mats and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's a nice tip, especially as we're moving into fall here, with certain areas that get snow and things. Number of different companies make great products. A name that I always hear is WeatherTech. I think they're a little overpriced most of the time. They don't really offer many discounts on their things, but their marketing is very good. They offer certain things that fit exact to your vehicle. And the other places you can get those are your dealerships, believe it or not. They offer quality products, whatever brand you have, for winter weather mats. And that's a good tip because your carpets are just a flat surface similar to your carpet at home, but the rubber mats are specially designed to catch the dirt and the grime and snow and ice and things like that. So it's going to help protect your vehicle's undercarpet and make it last a whole lot longer for you.
Exactly. Rich, I just want to bring up one thing real quick here before we run out of time. This time of year, autumn, a lot of friends of mine, including myself, like to go hunting. And I just want to bring this up because I have this in a lot of discussions. And even when any of you out there, believe it or not, a lot of automotive people are also in hunting. It's supposedly the hunting and fishing is one of the top activities that, believe it or not, technicians do nationwide. There's been a survey conducted. But anyhow, stereotypically, when you think of, a hunter or a fisherman or an outdoorsman, you're going to think they most of the time drive a four-wheel drive pickup truck, which in most cases is an essential tool. But I have a lot of friends that, they come to me knowing vehicles and they're like, hey, Rick, listen, I can't afford a big pickup truck. And, I don't go off road to the trail. I usually park on the side and it's so heavily wooded that I can't drive in there anyway. I got to hike a little bit to get to my tree stand or whatever it is, or where they're going to hunt, their favorite hunting spot or even fishing spot for that nature. Like, I don't need the four-wheel drive, but, I like having a truck, but, I have more gear than I do. And, if I put the cap on the pickup truck and I put the deer back in there, but then I have my gear in there, and anyone who knows that when you deer hunt, after a while, that becomes smelly back there.
Right.
So, and then they're like, well, even the gas mileage, they're getting much better these days. Don't get me wrong. A lot of your trucks are getting better fuel economy. But still, with the four-wheel drive and all that extra weight, it tends to be a lot worse than some other vehicles. So I don't know what it is. Of course, the minivan gets a very bad rap. Most people won't drive them. But if you really break it down, a minivan, Rich, is one of the best hunting vehicles you can get. And here's why. You don't need four-wheel drive like we've touched earlier. Again, it's nice if you have somebody that does go into deep mud trails for the hunting spot. Granted, you may want to elect to get that. But the majority of people, especially in New Jersey, aren't going deep into the woods with a vehicle. You might have an ATV or something like that, but you're not taking your actual everyday vehicle or your vehicle into the woods. Mm-hmm. So right there, you don't need the four-wheel drive. Minivan's going to handle your personnel if you're going to go hunting with buddies, all your gear without a problem. And your fuel economy is going to be superb. Now you say, okay, you just got your deer. What are you going to do? Minivans are not known for towing because they're unibody vehicles, they're front-wheel drive, the axles can't handle it. But you can put a hitch on a minivan and put a cargo carrier. If you ever seen them, you can Google them. They're little metal cargo carriers, and even Harbor Freight sells them. And they handle up to maybe 500 pounds. Some of them are 250 pounds, whatever. You can put a deer on one of those. It's outside. It's not with your gear. And you cover it with a tarp because not everybody is hunter savvy. And you can cover it with a tarp. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to be morally correct or whatever you want to call it.
If you don't want a deer hanging from the top of your SUV.
Yeah, if you don't want it. And again, this is in the back now. This is next to your hitch.
Mm-hmm.
You put a cargo carrier, you put your deer there, throw a tarp over it with ratchet straps, your bungee cords, you're good to go. And you have all your gears, bone dry, you can bring people with you. Plenty of room. And you don't have to worry about the weather. A lot of people have pickup trucks without a cap on it or a cover, a lot of their gear gets wet. And there's not that, I know with these quad cab pickups today, you can fit a lot of stuff in them too. But again, it's coming at a cost. You have all that extra weight with most four-wheel drives.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you've got bigger vehicle, bigger tires, more weight, worse gas. So a lot of times, a lot of people are like, what are you, crazy minivan? Like, yeah, if you really break it down and you start doing that, it works. And now I've got quite a few friends of mine now that are hunters that went that route, and they can't believe they're actually driving a minivan, but they realize it's very practical. Now, again, it's not for everyone, but the majority of people out there. And I think once people catch on to this, I'm not saying it's going to take over the pickup truck world because it most likely won't. But if you don't use a pickup truck for what it's meant to be used for, and you're only, you're going hunting, look at the minivans. And I'm all about the American brands. Toyota makes a great one and Honda makes a great one. But, I kind of tend to favor the Dodges on the minivan world. I think they make one of the best minivans. The Grand Caravan is still to date one of the best ones, in my opinion, of course. They don't really have too many problems with them, and if you maintain them, they're going to last pretty much forever. So, again, get away from the stereotypes. Look into it. You'll see I'm right.
That's a good tip there, and that's what having vehicles is all about. You don't have to necessarily, as Rick said, the last couple years, people have gravitated back to the bigger trucks. Gas prices went down. Just 2 years ago, 3-4 years ago or so, when gas was almost $4 a gallon.
$5, sure.
A lot of people ran away from these heavier vehicles. They couldn't even afford to drive them. In some instances, people were spending more money on gas a month than the car payment. And we're talking $400 or $500, depending on what they do for a living. But that's a good tip there. Rick just brought up about utilizing a vehicle, not necessarily as you would think, but for a good purpose.
Exactly. And that goes with everything. A lot of people, and me included, we tend to gravitate towards something that we want rather than what we need. And you have to look at where you live. And again, everybody's different, but for the majority, do you have snow 6 months out of the year? Is it at least half? Most of us, it's not the case. It's only, a few winter months, 2 or 3 months. I'm also the type that I have a motorcycle license, but I won't ride a motorcycle because it's not something I would personally ride all year long. If I can't have something that I can do at least half the time, I personally won't want it. I personally will not ride a motorcycle 6 months out of the year. So for me, I won't own one. Yes, I have a license. Yes, I can ride. But for me, I would not own one because I wouldn't get more than 6 months' time at it. I also don't own a swimming pool because to me, owning something that I can't utilize more than a few months, for me, again, that's for me. So I like stuff that I can use all the time, all weather, whatever. And that's where I'm at. But again, everybody's needs are different. You have to really break it down. And you got to get away from what you want. You got to go for what you need. And you have to break it down. Do you have a family? Do you carry friends around with you? some people want to go for sports cars, but then every time they need something, they have to call their friend that has a truck. And if you use a truck at least once a month, it may be worth getting your own truck.
Getting a truck, yeah. Now, just to wrap this up for this edition of the podcast, I had an interaction with a customer recently at a dealership, and this customer, initially wanted just one product. He came up to the counter, and you never know who you're dealing with at a car dealership or repair facility if you happen to work at a Firestone or someplace like that. Some of these customers, and this one in particular, had an accident. Somebody hit into the back of his vehicle, caused, I believe he said it was $2,500 worth of damage. He had a late 2000 sports car, and he was looking for a replacement rim. And this sports car happened to be sort of not a rare car, but when you get into specialty packages, they don't produce a lot of these parts sometimes after 10 years. So it's a hard thing to get some of these parts, especially if you have a sport model in many instances. But to make a long story short about this particular customer is an insurance company was telling him that they couldn't obtain a rim for him, and this rim was close to $1,000 in cost, if you can believe that. So he went to a local dealership to try to buy it himself. He just couldn't believe that this company couldn't get him a rim. So, but in his conversation, it turns out he had 4 or 5 different vehicles, and he had houses on both coasts, both the East Coast and the West Coast. And he sort of said something along the lines that Rick was just saying. I have to get rid of some of my vehicles. I have too much. This person just happened to be well off to be able to afford that kind of a lifestyle. But I think something clicked in his head, like, hey, maybe I'm getting too big for my own self, so to speak. And that really, after the customer had left and whatnot, it made an impression upon me that, yeah, you might have a have a point there, Rick. Settle upon what you need rather than trying to get too much sometimes might be a good thing.
Exactly. And that's mainly what we hear on the show. It's all about that. It's like, make sure you get the most bang for your buck. And, you got to look at your everyday life, and what are you going to use more? And I fell in that trap. I mean, I've had the sports cars and I've had the lifted trucks and all. And yeah, they're great for what they are. But again, a lot of it's really unnecessary. And I understand cars are an extension of one's personality, but I kind of, even being into the field and obviously the knowledge that I have, I don't do that anymore. I'm beyond that now. It's kind of like I drive what I need. I have what works for me in my lifestyle at the moment that I need it. And in all cars, you can make them last forever. They can be disposable. You can drive something and sell it in 3-4 years and get something else. Yeah, as your lifestyle changes, you can change. I had an SUV 4-wheel drive for years. And I did get rid of it. And honestly, I've never used a 4-wheel drive. And we've had snow. And I'm the type that only would put it in 4-wheel drive when I'm starting to lose traction or something like that. But I never lost traction. I never used a 4-wheel drive. And then finally, the motor, because the newer ones are electronic, the motor went. And I wasn't going to replace it because I didn't need it.
Right.
And I sold it to a friend of mine, which he replaced it because he wants to have it for this winter. But I figured, hey, I don't need it. I'm not using it. Why spend the money to repair it? So I never even bothered fixing it. And, it was an easy fix, but it wasn't worth my time. So now I have a front-wheel drive with great tires, and it'll probably be a lot better than my 4-wheel drive because most 4-wheel drives are rear-wheel drive all the time until you engage the 4-wheel drive. And at that point, you don't want to have 4-wheel drive all the time because of the wear it does. You only want to put it in 4-wheel drive when you're losing, or you think you're going to lose traction if it's icy, obviously, or really heavy snow. But generally speaking, I only use 4-wheel drive to get me out of a situation. And in my entire 44 years of life, I might have used 4-wheel drive 2 times in all my life to get out of a sticky situation, so to speak. It was heavy snow, and I was in a parking spot. It wasn't even driving. It was just in a parking spot that I had to get out of.
Right.
And it was plowed in, which generally, if I shoveled, I would have gotten out. And you're driving around with all these extra components all year long. Again, for me, it was just a waste of time and money, and I've come to that conclusion now. At this point in time, I don't ever foresee me getting another four-wheel drive vehicle. I just, for me, I like the way they look, but again, that's just a like. It's not a need. And I'm saving so much money now on fuel economy. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of money that I'm saving having just a front-wheel drive versus a four-wheel drive. That weight change is amazing.
True. And now that we've been talking about four-wheel drives for a big portion of the show, don't allow you, if you do have an SUV, and a lot of people do, families today in this day and age, they have the different offerings of SUVs. Don't let that four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive give you a false sense of security in bad weather, especially as we're getting into near the winter, but we're still into the fall season. A lot of areas of the country get a lot of rain and the leaves are coming down. But don't let that four-wheel drive lull you into the sense of security, because your vehicle is very what would be a good word, Rit?
They can tend to be unstable because a lot of them are more top-heavy. Their center of gravity, especially in the SUV, is pretty bad. And they won't be as stable. And a lot of times people with four-wheel drive think they can still drive the speed limit because they're able to. You have to understand, you can't maneuver quick in an SUV because they're top-heavy. Again, your center of gravity is not there. Mm-hmm. And you can't stop. No matter how, I don't care if you have a 100-wheel drive, you're not going to stop on ice.
Yeah.
If you're going down a hill on ice, you might get up the hill with the four-wheel drive, but now you have to come down.
Yeah.
And you have all that extra weight with the SUV and it being top-heavy. You're just got a recipe for disaster there.
Right. And I did notice an all-wheel drive Jeep just the other day going at a high rate of speed. And, they might have had it in four-wheel drive, but that sense of security with them was probably high that, hey, I'm riding in a Jeep. I got four-wheel drive on. I can do just about anything in this vehicle. And the facts are that you shouldn't even think that way. And the guy sort of jerked his wheel one way or another, and I thought he was going to go head over heels and start rolling because he was in heavy traffic, and he just, for whatever reason, either wanted to change lanes or his hand slipped on the wheel a little bit, and I saw the rear wheel sort of almost, go out of control. So that's a good tip from Rick there. And Rick, wrapping up the podcast, I just wanted to let our listeners know to get in touch with us. Send us an email if you want, if you have a car repair question. I know we didn't hit on many of the car repair issues tonight, but send it to info, I-N-F-O, at carandtrucktalk.com if you have a question, comment, or concern about our show. Rick, I'm going to give you the final word here for the podcast. How do you want to wrap it up?
And if we do answer your question on the air, you'll receive a T-shirt that we don't have.
Yeah, you'll receive an old, smelly mechanic's T-shirt that we can find somewhere in a shop. So if you want one of those, please send us an email. Maybe there will be some oil on it as well.
Yeah, just thanks as usual, and to the listeners out there. We do the best we can to entertain you as well as give you some strong advice. And again, most of it's based on our experiences, and you might have your own experiences and opinions, and that's completely fine. You just do what's best for you, and do what's going to suit your needs. And again, all questions we'll pretty much answer any of the questions. If we don't do them on the air, they will be responded to through the email.
That's true, and that goes for just about anything car related. If you have a question about going to car shows, or you want to share an experience with us, that's great too. So thanks for listening to this edition of Car and Truck Talk, that is, even SUVs. We'll talk to you again soon.